Good to go? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Inshallah, my name is Brother Jawad Khan. I'm here on behalf of the Muslim Legal Fund of America, MLFA. As you all know, I was able to speak to some of you guys who are here for the Jumu'ah today for the second khutbah. I was able to speak a little bit about our work. We are an organization that was founded about 20 years ago after 9/11. In response to a lot of what the government was doing to Muslims in terms of unfair treatment and utilizing national security law, quote unquote, as a means of profiling Muslims and targeting them and treating them unfairly in many different ways. And alhamdulillah, we've been around for this all this time. We were founded right here in Dallas, Texas, down in Richardson. And so inshallah, tonight we wanted to come to you, especially during this time, to be able to provide a program that's called MLFA in your community. And tonight's theme is social media, the FBI, and your rights. With me today is our esteemed attorney, Safiya Khalid, who is a staff attorney in our criminal defense department. And inshallah, she'll be going through a presentation tonight. Inshallah, I'll just let her take it away. You can introduce further if you'd like to.
All right, can everyone hear me? All right, assalamu alaikum everyone. It's really nice to be here. Really nice to be here with you all tonight. And thank you, Jawad, for that introduction. As Jawad said, I'm the criminal defense staff attorney at MLFA. In the criminal department, we represent Muslim clients all around the country, nationally, that have been investigated by the FBI and or charged by the federal government in national security cases. So most of our cases are material support of terrorism. They often involve FBI entrapment, significant surveillance. Our clients typically are very young Muslims, often recent reverts to Islam. And in our presentation today, we're going to split it up into two parts. So the first part, what we're going to talk about is First Amendment free speech protections as they apply to the masjid. So we'll talk about imam specifically, imam speech that takes place on behalf of the mosque, and we'll do some question and answers about that. So that's really relevant for anyone who is in a leadership position in their masjid or in their community. The second part, we're going to talk about free speech in criminal cases. And that's where we'll talk more about the trend. What are we seeing now? I know Palestine's on everyone's mind, so we'll bring that in a little bit. And we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions and answers. So what I want to talk first about is the First Amendment, freedom of speech. In the United States, we know our political and religious speech is generally protected. The government cannot prohibit and cannot limit political and religious speech unless they have a really, really, really good reason. So what does that mean at the mosque? The leading case here is essentially that religious practices and speech that have to do with how we practice our religion, what we say in our mosques, on our Friday prayers, that's all generally protected. We'll talk a little bit later in the criminal specific exceptions to these rules, but generally it's protected. What's not protected? So imams, the clergy privilege, that means imams in this case, in churches that would be the priest or the pastor, but the leader in the community, so the imams at the masjid, they have a similar privilege with people that approach them at the masjid for questions about private matters, the same way an attorney you would have in a relationship you would have with your attorney. So in his spiritual capacity, if you go to an imam at the masjid, or if you're an imam at the masjid and someone approaches you and they talk to you about private matters that they're dealing with, that you think are potentially concerning or that might make you nervous, they might involve, whatever it is, that's all protected. It means it's confidential. Nobody can force you to reveal what was told to you. If a young man comes to you at the masjid and tells you he's struggling with something because of something that's going on in his in his life and you feel concerned about it, or you feel like, is it okay for you to know that information? Generally, that's protected. You do not have to divulge that information to anyone, except in a few certain types of matters. So if somebody tells you, for example, that they're about to commit a violent crime against somebody, you do have to report that. If they're just saying they've been thinking about these things or they have these concerns, you do not. Other things that have to be reported are things like sexual assault or things involving those types of offenses involving children. Those are mandatory reporting type issues, and you would have to look at your specific state to know what your reporting requirements there. If you have concerns about things somebody has told you that are protected and confidential in your role as an imam, reach out to us. We know the law, we understand the law, and our job is to be able to advise you, and anything anybody tells us is also protected and confidential. So we will be able to advise you on how to navigate any concerns you might have, but also know that unless it's one of these concerns, that information is confidential. Fundraising at the mosque. So generally, fundraising at the mosque is allowed. Mosques are usually, masjids are registered 501c3 charities. So one thing, the only real thing that is you have to be careful with here is about how the fundraising is done. So where problems can occur is not the fundraising that occurs in the mosque. It's fundraising that happens via the mail, because that can imply criminal statutes. And the most important thing to know here is that it needs to be accurate. What you are saying you're raising money for, that needs to be what you're actually raising the money for. It has to be what you're actually spending the funds for. That's the most important thing. Also, right now, this is particularly important now for masjids, and that is political endorsements and the charitable status. Because most masjids are registered charities, they cannot be seen to endorse specific political candidates within as the mosque. So this masjid, for example, couldn't say, that they were particularly endorsing Biden or any specific candidate. They could do that outside of the masjid, but they couldn't do that themselves. That includes giving donations to one specific campaign or encouraging the members to give to one specific campaign. That cannot be part of masjid activities. It can be done in your individual capacity outside of the masjid. So an example, for me, I work at MLFA, we're a 501c3. So I couldn't, as an attorney at MLFA, I couldn't go and tell people to endorse a specific candidate or vote for a specific candidate. But in my private, personal capacity as Safia Khalid, with no association to MLFA, I can engage in political activities. I just have to make sure I'm very clear that they are not connected. So the example here is, like we're saying, not at the masjid, but at that extends not just within the masjid, anything that is masjid specific. So if the masjid has a newsletter that it distributes, that newsletter also cannot endorse a specific candidate, raise funds for a specific candidate, things like that. The factors that are considered is whether the statement is delivered close in time to the election, whether it makes reference to voting or an election, and whether it's addressed in communication that has been raised for specific candidates. So basically, there are specific factors. If you're considering your speech, if you want to know exactly how far the election, this election is going to be very important. So if you're concerned about how far you can go with asking the community to take specific political actions, or how you want to go about working with other organizations and political organizing, again, reach out to us. We can look at your materials. We can explain the law to you. We can tell you how to word these things, how to make sure that you're doing it correctly within the law, and if necessary, what needs to be done in your personal capacity and how to do that. All right. So now I want to do a few question and answers, and you guys can participate, but this is to get everybody sort of thinking about what we just talked about. So the first example is of Imam A. Imam A is the Imam of Masjid J, a section 501c3 charity. It's well known in the community. He's well known in the community. With the masjid's permission, with their permission, Candidate C publishes a full-page ad in the local newspaper listing 5 prominent imams who have personally endorsed Candidate C, including Imam A. Imam A is identified in the ads as the Imam of Masjid J. The ad states, titles and affiliations of each individual are provided for identification purposes only. The ad is paid for by Candidate T's campaign committee. So in that example, where a candidate has specifically said in his ad that these 5 imams, including the imam of this particular masjid, has endorsed him, does Imam A's endorsement of Candidate C constitute a violation of the rules that we just discussed, the rules against the endorsement of a political candidate by a religious organization? What does everyone think? Is that a violation? Yeah, go ahead and raise your hand if you've got yes, if you think yes. Why? Okay, so the imam is not supposed to endorse political candidates. Does anybody think that this is not a violation? Why?
I think this is his personal thing outside of the masjid. Also, he's the imam of the masjid. He's doing this on a personal thing. And maybe states that the ad is posted, campaign is posted by somebody else and not the masjid.
Okay, so he's saying because this ad is posted by another campaign and this is separate and done in his individual capacity, he doesn't think this is a violation. Let's see what the answer is. That endorsement is not a violation because the ad was not paid for by the masjid. So if it's not paid for by the masjid and it's not otherwise an official publication in the masjid, so for example, it wasn't published in the masjid's newsletter, this was published by a separate campaigning candidate, and the endorsement was made in his personal capacity, that's not a political campaign intervention. So he's in his personal capacity in a separate publication not associated with the mosque. That's not a violation. That imam can absolutely do that. Next example. Imam D is the imam of Masjid M, a Section 501c3 charity again. During regular Friday prayers of shortly before the election, Imam D preached on a number of issues, including the importance of voting in the upcoming election, and concluded by stating, "It is important that you all do your duty in the election to vote for candidate C." Do his remarks constitute an impermissible endorsement? Who thinks yes? Raise your hands. Okay. Why do you think yes? So he's endorsing candidate C in the khutbah in his role as imam. Does anyone think that he is not in violation of the endorsement code? Nobody thinks it's good. Yeah, those remarks indicating support for candidate D were made during an official religious service, so they are an impermissible political campaign intervention because it was done in his capacity as the imam at the mosque. That was mosque activity. Yes? That is a great question. It would be because he is an employee of the masjid, it would implicate the masjid. So that's why masjids want to be very, very careful about that. And if you have more questions specifically about your imam or you want specific trainings, reach out to us. We do all of that. Third example, Imam C is the imam of Masjid I, a Section 501c3 organization. Masjid I publishes a monthly newsletter that is distributed to all attendees. In each issue, Imam C has a column titled My Views. The month before the election, Imam C states in the My Views column, It is my personal opinion that candidate T would harm Islam and should not be elected. For that one issue, Imam C pays from his personal funds the portion of the cost of the newsletter attributable to the My Views column. Can Imam C use the My Views column to express his personal opinion regarding candidate T? Raise your hand if you think yes. Why? So he's publishing it stating that it's his own personal view. Does it? Yes. The newsletter belongs to the masjid. So you're saying that because this is the masjid's newsletter, that would be in the masjid's capacity, so it would be a violation. Anybody else have any thoughts before we see the answer? Let's see. Even though he paid part of the cost of the newsletter is an official publication of the masjid. Because the endorsement appeared in an official publication of Masjid I, it constitutes political campaign intervention. So that's because that is that masjid-specific newsletter. It doesn't matter that he paid for part of the cost where he was expressing his personal view. It's still being done in the capacity of the masjid, even if it isn't in his personal capacity. All right, I believe this is the last example for this section. Imam B is the Imam of Masjid K, a Section 501c3 organization, and is well known in the community. 3 weeks before the election, he attends a press conference at candidate B's campaign headquarters and states that candidate B should be re-elected. Imam B does not say he's speaking on behalf of Masjid K. His endorsement is reported in the local newspaper, and Imam B is identified in the articles as the Imam of Masjid K. Can Imam B make the speech endorsing candidate B? Raise your hand if you think yes. Why do you think yes? So that's his personal opinion, and he's allowed to make that separate from the masjid. Who else thinks yes? Yes, why? So he's outside of the masjid, he's not on the premises, this is his own separate. Yeah, he's there in his own capacity. All right. Does anyone think he can't make those statements? Why? Because he's identified as the Imam of the masjid, he can't. He should not. All right. So Imam B may make the speech endorsing candidate B because he's making the endorsement was not made during an official masjid function in an official masjid publication and did not otherwise use the masjid's assets. Also, Imam B did not state he was speaking as a representative of the masjid. Therefore, his actions do not constitute political campaign intervention. So your concern, which is the realistic one, why imams have to be careful, anyone speaking on behalf of a charity has to be careful, is you may speak in one place in your personal capacity, but you don't control who's going to publish what, and then may attribute it to your official capacity. So for example, I may here tonight have a conversation with somebody in my private personal capacity, and I may endorse, Joe Biden for president. That person may go and write an article and say, MLFA endorses Joe Biden, even though I said that in my personal capacity. So you have to be very clear when in all your community, especially leadership of masjids, have to be very clear in their communications, positions they take, how they're quoted, how they're being viewed, and how it will reflect on the masjid. All right, does anybody need a 3 or 4 minute break, or can we continue to the next part? Continue? Okay. All right, so we're switching gears a little now. Now we're going to be talking more about the actual criminal violations where speech is not protected. And this is less focused on the mosque. This is where we are trying to bring in and educate leaders in the community about issues we're seeing in federal criminal cases brought against Muslims. Because the mosque needs to be aware of how these cases happen. They need to be aware of current FBI practices, what young people especially are facing, what's happening on social media. And we need to build a community where young people especially feel careful, and families feel careful bringing their issues to leadership here to help intervene early so that we don't have these big cases because people feel shame or fear about bringing things to the community. So we'll start here. Since 9/11, the protections of the First Amendment have been out of bounds for American Muslims. What do I mean by that? Our political and religious speech is generally protected. Generally protected, meaning there are some exceptions and there are some extra exceptions from what we've seen in our cases for American Muslims. What's generally protected is that unless it presents a clear exception, you can make most political statements, you can make most religious statements, most religious practices. If it can be read as a true threat. So if that speech can be interpreted as threatening harm against a specific person or a specific group of people, that speech can be criminalized. Also, I'll just go back quick. The other type of speech that can be criminalized, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, is incitement to lawless imminent action. So that can be statements that are read telling people, calling for violence, or that can be interpreted as people calling for a sudden threat. And that can even be something that is happening on social media. If they're saying that there's going to be a protest and somebody posts a comment, somebody should do this violent thing at that protest, that's not protected speech. That can be criminalized. And more importantly, this type of speech, what we see a lot of times online with young people is young people are smart. They read a lot about the First Amendment. They know their rights. They know their speech is protected. So we do see a lot of young people coming right up to the line. But for American Muslims, in our experience, what we've seen is that line is a little further back for American Muslims. So even if you make a statement that isn't exactly a threat against a specific person, or it's not a statement calling for immediate violence, if it's anywhere in that zone, this can be pretext for an FBI investigation. This is what we've seen in a lot of our cases, is that the FBI will use speech, protected speech, to identify individuals, especially young people online, or through undercovers and informants in their personal lives, to start investigating them further. We'll be given a lot of examples. So one example, right, is right now we see in a lot of protests, a lot of political speech, and this was happening before Palestine, right? We saw this since 9/11 with everything happening all over the world, the Arab Spring, what was happening in Syria, Bashar al-Assad. Young people, they have a lot of feelings and thought about this. And so they're very vocal in their personal lives, on the internet. And the FBI doesn't know, the FBI has an interesting view of Muslims we've seen in our cases. And the best way to boil it down is a statement that was made by the former head of the FBI. He said, "We are looking for a needle in a stack of needles," when he described how hard it is for them to identify the bad Muslims. That tells you a lot. That statement tells you that all Muslims look the same to them. They don't really know what they're looking for. And that leads to heavy surveillance. Because if we all look the same to them, then they don't know what they're looking for. And that's what led to this huge police surveillance state. After 9/11, we all heard a lot of stories about the FBI being in mosques, informants being in mosques. People were very familiar with that, but what we've seen in our cases in like the last 10 years is that they're also very much online, on social media, in Telegram groups, in WhatsApp groups. And the problem with social media and the internet is people are much more uninhibited with their speech on the internet. You wouldn't believe some of the things kids will say online because it doesn't seem real. It's not as serious. People say things on the internet because they're not saying it to your face. You may not even imagine, like these sweet young kids that are quiet and shy, and they're very vocal in Discord, the video game chat rooms and things like that. So that speech is being viewed by a lot of people. They're making that speech to their friends, but there's other people that are seeing it. So the FBI's concern, for example, is that for the last 10 years, that ISIS recruiters would see this speech, or that they would try and intervene and recruit these young Western Muslims. And sometimes we did see that happening. But because of, this is like some of the type of propaganda you would see and that the FBI would see. So they really had this real fear that Western Muslims were going to be recruited on the internet in these secret chat rooms and stuff. And that led to us seeing the FBI following a lot of these young people into chat rooms, into WhatsApp groups, befriending them and then getting into their friends' Telegram groups, news media. And they're doing that because they see this speech and they think that they'll be able to find or locate the next potential terrorist. And this is everyone. The surveillance is very widespread. We see this in a lot of the groups in most mosques. And this is what we typically defend against. So in our criminal defense department, we select our cases for cases where we know that these Muslims, especially these very young Muslims, they've done nothing. They've done nothing wrong. They've had no intent to do anything wrong. But they get drawn in online in this online speech. And it's typically protected, speech that's protected, that over time with engagement with agents or people who are using very provocative language that becomes the norm in the group, that they then start making statements they wouldn't typically say. So how does that get criminalized? How does that become, if it's almost protected speech, how do they charge this? What do we see so many Muslims charged with terrorism when they've done nothing? Everyone can agree there's no victims, no attack was planned, they didn't do anything. So how do they get charged? A statute we see a lot is called the Material Support of Terrorism Statute. That statute states that anybody who knowingly provides material support to a foreign terrorist organization can be fined and can face a prison sentence up to 20 years. What is material support? Material support is almost anything. It can be speech. So if you make a statement that is pro or supporting a terrorist organization and it is somewhat in coordination or for the benefit of that organization, that can be charged as material support. It can be something typical like donating directly to a terrorist organization. It can also be donations that are made to individuals that are in the region of a terrorist organization that they have evidence if you supported the group that was in that region and you donated to somebody else who was there and they have any kind of tenuous link between that donation or that individual and that organization, that can be charged as material support as well. The only thing really that is excluded is medical supplies, not even medical treatment. The case that interpreted this was a Supreme Court case, and in that case was where they explained that even speech can be material support. And the only thing it really allowed for was independent advocacy speech. And that is speech that is made completely independent of an organization, completely independent of anybody associated in the organization. And so if someone was to ask, is it under US law allowed to make, are you allowed to make a pro-Hamas statement? Say, if it's 100% independent, technically yes. Is it advisable? Absolutely not. Because in our experience, what we've seen is that type of speech is what opens the door to the FBI investigation. And once the investigation starts, it leads to all the things we're about to talk about now, which is the recent trends in our cases. So we'll talk now a little bit about some of the FBI tactics we've seen in our cases. In one case, this was a single mother in Tennessee. She was a recent revert to Islam. She was young. She was a clinical social worker, so a very soft-hearted, bleeding heart type person. And she was online. They did not have a large Muslim community where she lived, so she was exploring Islam on the internet. She made some friends with sisters online, and she was approached by the FBI online because on Instagram, she had liked a few posts that were about the events that were happening in Syria. They were anti-Bashar al-Assad. There was a post that she liked an image of the ISIS flag. So those posts were reported by just a random person that saw her Instagram page, started this investigation. Over the course of the investigation, she interacts with 3 different FBI agents. We're getting to how does she commit a crime, right? One of the FBI agents becomes a close friend of hers. She's also supposedly a recent revert. She's Muslim. She introduces her to a Saudi sheikh. The Saudi sheikh is also an FBI undercover. This was a source of a lot of litigation in this case, but that Saudi sheikh approached her in real life. She met him. He led a prayer with her friend, and this person was entirely FBI. They then start sending text messages saying that the Saudi sheikh was advising her, giving her misinterpretations of Quran and Hadith, giving her misinterpretations that were explaining to her that she should travel, she could and she should travel to join ISIS in Syria. Luckily, this sister she was pretty knowledgeable. She had read a lot, so she would send back to the FBI, I don't think that's what that Hadith means. I don't think that's what that Quran verse means. I think it means this. And they went back and forth with this fake FBI sheikh trying to convince her that no, she could do that. That didn't work. Well, in the end, the FBI undercover, her friend, the female, told her that she was going to travel. And in an effort to get her not to travel, she shared the telegram handle, just like the name, it's like a phone number, for somebody who she thought would encourage her not to go. And giving that number was considered, they charged that as material support of terrorism. I put this slide here because this is the kind of thing we see a lot of young people posting online. Young people think that it's, all this FBI undercover stuff against Muslims was a long time ago. It was right after 9/11, and they make jokes about it. So this is a meme that I saw, and I thought it was funny because I have a dark sense of humor now since this is what I see every single day at work. But there are a lot of kids that are laughing at this thinking, yeah, when you meet your internet friends in real life, right? So this is her, it reminded me of Georgiana finally meeting her friends, the FBI. But the message here is it's not funny. I see so many on Twitter. There's a common meme where it's a person with the camera at a bad angle right by their face, and they say, "Oh, my FBI agent watching me eat dinner tonight," or something. And so, it's become very lighthearted, but it is pretty serious. Another example is a case we had. It was a true threats case. So this is where we were talking about speech that is not protected. This was a young man, Khalid Miah, who had thought that his statements He was being investigated by the FBI for a comment he had posted on a YouTube video. He'd posted a kind of inappropriate comment on a YouTube video, nothing that terrible, but that comment was reported to the FBI. And then the FBI started investigating him. When the FBI agent showed up to investigate him, he got upset because he thought, this is protected speech. What's a big deal? People say these kind of things on YouTube all the time, and far, far worse. And so after that, he started posting on his Twitter account statements antagonizing the FBI agents. He criticized their physical looks, he criticized their wives, he made fun of their educational background. He just thought, this is fun, it's not illegal, I can make fun of these FBI agents all day long. They never responded to him, and in the end, he makes a series of 5 tweets that they then charge as making threats against the FBI. He tweets, "The 0 hour is approaching." He says, "Currently eating pasta and watching the second plane hit the South Tower." He tweets the coordinates for the FBI headquarters, not where those agents are, for a totally different one. They take that series of tweets, and they charge it as making a true threat. And throughout the litigation in that trial, they painted him as making a terrorist threat against the FBI, and he was convicted on those counts. So the point of those examples is to show when we're talking about these statutes, material support of terrorism, making true threats, what kind of conduct does that include? That's what we're talking about here. The last case I want to give you guys an example of was a case in California. That case ended in a mistrial. They charged our client with 4 counts of material support of terrorism. In the end, they dismissed all of those counts, and he pled to just making a false statement. But how did they get there? So this was also a young revert, right? And we pick these cases for a reason, because the people that are here in the masjid, are not typically you are the connected people, you have community support, you're well aware, the imams, have a lot of support. The people who need to be reached, that you need to provide the information to, that we need to be aware of are out there, are the recent reverts, are like Khalid Mia, they're in families that are very isolated, dealing with mental health issues and low income. And we need to be able to bring them in the community so that we can give them this information early on, we can intervene early on, we can give them more education, and pull them away from these more, people that are trying to push them over the edge. So in this last case, this was during COVID. Jason had just become Muslim, and he started posting that he wanted to start a self-defense group. So in that group, they start talking, and it's a bunch of very young Muslims. He's very young, and there are kids as young as 16 years old. And some of them meet on Discord. They end up on Signal. They think Signal is very secure, and they should have all their conversations in Signal because nobody can see it there. And of course, there are a few FBI agents in the Signal group. And so there's actually screenshots of every single thing that they said in the Signal group. What was happening there is, and what we learned here, and it was particularly concerning to us, and it came out in the trial, is that the FBI was not just talking to these children online and trying to, they would bring up these very religiously inflammatory concepts. They would constantly bring up jihad and which country should we travel to for jihad, and that's not what the kids are talking about. But what they were also doing was taking each person separate from the group and having individual conversations. This included a 16-year-old Muslim boy that the FBI agent, who was a grown man, met up with in person. So they have not told the parents that he's under investigation. They're driving around with this kid, and they're just preaching him, trying to, radicalize him. All extremist stuff, trying to radicalize this kid. The speech goes so far. In the end, Jason was charged with 4 counts of material support. One of those counts was just for posting the link to the Hamas website. He posted the link in a group. And because that link is where they also collect funds, that was considered attempted material support of terrorism. So most of our cases, it's not actual material support of terrorism. They're charging attempted material support, which carries the same potential sentence. Why are we giving you all of these examples, right? We want you to understand the law, but we also want the wider community to feel empowered, right? There's a lot of fear around these issues. What we've seen is when somebody hears that kid at the mosque that is talking about jihad or the more extremist ideas, or someone has their kid and they know that their kid is saying these things online, people get really worried about it. And the tendency is to ignore it or to turn away, pretend like it's not happening, it's somebody else's problem. And in one of those cases, they were kicked out of the masjid. And what actually needs to happen is we need to educate these people. We need to feel empowered, right? So what we would like is when people hear this type of speech or they have concerns, approach us. We can give you advice. What can you do? People are always concerned about their liability. If I even know about this, or if I even have this concern, then I could get in trouble. That's not true. You can bring that person in to speak with us, and we can give you advice, and we can tell you where the law is, and we can explain, what is happening. If you have concerns about speech you see online, or if you're concerned about something you've posted online, or donations that you've made, or you have just general questions and concerns about something you're seeing, please approach us, right? We can partner and help you. We can advise you. We can advise you on speech. If you're having a concern in your community, it takes more than just one person. It takes everybody. And so the message here really is, don't run away from these things, because that's how we end up in these bad situations and these poor families and these more isolated people getting into a lot of trouble, and that affects the whole community. When one person in the community goes down, that affects the entire community. So we've got a couple of examples here. The first one is, Samir wants to donate to help local Syrians who are in desperate need. He doesn't want to give his charity to Islamic Relief or a major US-based charity because he notes Islamic teachings about giving the money directly to the needy so they receive it as quickly as possible. He has seen several links on social media of people in Syria who can take donations. What would you do or advise Samir? What would you do about this situation or advise Samir in this situation? But sorry, someone was calling something out here. Saying stick with a known registered charity. What was it? So make sure the source is known and it's not from a place you don't know where it's coming from. Any other thoughts? What would you do in this situation if he wants to do this and he wants to get it there as quickly as possible? You shouldn't do that at all. Unless it's his family or somebody he knows personally. Okay. The personal person could be an FBI agent. Everybody's FBI. No. So yeah, there's a lot of different views on this, and that's because in each situation is going to be very fact specific. This is a big, it depends, right? The point of this question is, there's a lot you need to know. Who is this person in Syria? Where is this person in Syria? What are the US regulations controlling aid to that part of Syria? How is he going to get it there? There's a lot you need to know. What is the safest way to get it there? Like, for example, with Palestine now, Gaza is under blockade. Gaza is also Hamas-controlled territory. So it's considered most aid that is going there, it is not through a US-based charity with following all the specific licensing and regulation rules. That's a concern. This opens up investigation possibilities. So in this case, this is this kind of thing, come to us. Talk to an attorney, if not us. This is a question for an attorney, right? Hey, and it's simple. It's a simple phone call. I have a concern. There's a guy at the mosque, he wants to do this. His cousin's in Syria and he wants to give money to them. I'm concerned what to advise. And we can talk about that. What are their concerns? What are the regulations for that particular part of the world? How to do it safely? But that's the kind of situation that should set off a little red flag in your mind. I need to talk to an attorney. I'll call MLFA, or I'll call my attorney, I'll call our compliance people. That's when to reach out. Next example, self-defense class. A young revert at the mosque who is very skilled in martial arts and has a military background wants to share his knowledge with the community. He proposes teaching a self-defense class at the masjid for young men. How would you approach this? You're the imam at the mosque. You have to spend more time, get to know him better before giving him an opportunity. How else would the rest of you approach this? Yes? Talk to the authority? Get advice on what should be done. All right, how would you approach this if you were just somebody else at the mosque? You weren't the imam, but you heard that there's a young revert, you know, he's got all these martial arts skills and he wants to teach other Muslims self-defense at the masjid. You're not the imam, you're just somebody else at the mosque. What would you do?
Say that there is a communication between him and the group that he's going to be working on, official channel.
So limit the communication, give it an official channel, keep it very specific. All right, anyone else? Talk to the board of the masjid. Yes. Take him to the FBI? No, the point of this talk is not to create paranoia. The point of this talk is to empower us and to educate each other about what is going on, to create the masjid a very unparanoid, open space so that anybody can come in. Hey, this guy wants to teach martial arts here. Should we talk to a lawyer about that? Is there any concerns? You know, and then you call your lawyer, you call us, and we'll ask questions. Who is this guy? What does he want to teach? How specific is it going to be? He probably shouldn't do it maybe as a mosque-sponsored activity. And there's advice, you know, about how to do this, and then you just move on, and everyone is fine. So the point here is these things will come up. Maybe you hear somebody saying with everything that's happening in Palestine, for example. Maybe you're just at the mosque and you hear a young person saying, oh, I'm posting on Twitter against this Zionist, and I'm saying all this crazy stuff. And you might think, I'm going to tell my son not to be his friend anymore. But that doesn't help. That doesn't deal with the situation, right? The situation should be, you know what, there's some speech concerns here. We've actually heard about, speech like that being reported to the FBI and investigated against Muslims. You should reach out to MLFA. You should get some education. Same thing in your WhatsApp groups. If you see something that concerns you, tell the admin about it. Say, refer this guy to get some education from an attorney about the implications of his speech. Because if that person doesn't want to be educated and they say, I don't care what the attorney says, I don't care if this isn't protected speech, then you don't trust that person, and you should have some concerns about them. But in most cases, right, the typical person just isn't aware of the implications and isn't even aware that they can just get easy, simple advice. And maybe the imam isn't aware, or community members, and so people run away from these things. But the impulse should really be, that's mildly, that is, set off a small alarm bell. Let me talk to an attorney about this, or reach out to MLFA and get some general advice. And that can change the whole course of events in a lot of these cases for our community by educating and empowering, ourselves and the people around us. So, and then this is what we're talking about here. And the point being, is before communities and families get destroyed, we want to reach out and we want to deal with these things. This slide is one of my favorite slides because I imagine, has anyone ever heard about those barrels that people would try and get in to go over Niagara Falls? So in these cases, like all the examples I gave you, we got those cases here. They're always calling us for help right here. And there's not really a lot we can do here. Here we can say, we'll represent you in your criminal trial against all these charges that the FBI has brought against you. Here's a little better, but also not a lot we can do, right? You want to reach out back here. There's a mild concern. My kid is posting stuff online and it's slightly concerning to me. Don't be so scared. I don't want people to know. I'm going to ignore it. I'll talk to him. He doesn't take it seriously. Reach out. Maybe he'll take an attorney seriously, or maybe you won't feel scared at the masjid on approaching a situation if you have an attorney dealing with it with you. So the earlier that we are approached, the more we can do, right? As it takes everyone. This person is not getting dragged out of here if it's just me and my boss, right? That's everyone. This is the imam, the community members, therapists, friends, other kids in their class, everybody, working together, getting rid of the fear, the paranoia, wanting to ignore and push things away. You can address these things, and that's what MLFA is here for. That's what attorneys are there for. So now I just want to open it up. If anybody's got questions, concerns, things that they want to ask about related to the presentation. Yes. How to identify the FBI agent? It can be anyone. It can be anyone. It can be the most religious person in the mosque with the biggest beard and the big sujood mark. It can be, somebody you never meet. It can just be a person you interact with on the internet who says all the right things, but maybe goes a little too far, but generally it's speech that would be concerning to you. Most Muslims are not out there calling for jihad on Twitter, They're having a normal conversation in their WhatsApp group, and then there's somebody else that comes in and pushes things way over the edge and really amplifies it and makes statements that it's wrong. It doesn't feel right. It's not something you would say. If it's speech that's concerning, that doesn't mean they're FBI, right? It means that person is obviously maybe very charged, and you should report them to the admin, encourage them to get education, talk to an attorney because of the concerns you have about their speech. You can say, I have concerns about the speech. I don't think it's protected. Maybe they should reach out to MLFA and talk about their speech. Or you can block and delete that. Make sure it's out of the group because it can implicate the group. Other questions? Yes. That's a great question. So why can't we just sue the FBI to stop them from bringing these cases? We would love to do that. Why is it so hard? It's hard because these cases happen over the course. It's not like our clients are just very stupid people. They're not dumb. It's not like they got on Twitter one day and that one day the agent told them, do you want to go for jihad? And they said, yes, I do. That's not what happens. It's like these people that become their best friends, and it's over 1, 2, 3, 4 years sometimes. And the speech is mostly 90% of the time it's fine. But occasionally there's some statements are made and there's enough there at the end of a couple of years to piece together maybe this person would have intended to help that group. They didn't, but they would have attempted to. And so they legally have a case at the end of it, at the end of these long investigations, because nobody's helping them. They don't know what is concerning. They don't have attorneys to reach out for help. by the end of it, it is a criminal charge. It's a valid criminal charge. They are convicted by a jury. It's not happening in a dark dungeon somewhere. You know, the judge with his anti-Muslim bias and the jury with their anti-Muslim bias convicts them, and they go to prison. And as far as they're concerned, all the law was followed. They had their attorney the whole way. It is, you know, they get processed. So it's actually very hard to bring a lawsuit. We do have cases where we have brought lawsuits and where we try to bring lawsuits where they've dropped the charges, where we've been able to have them admit, yeah, they didn't have it quite, or they went too far. And so we do try and do that where we can, but this is where the community can really help us. You know, the more educated we are, the more we can spot these things early, you know, before we go over to the waterfall. The earlier we spot it, the more we can do, the better chance we have to protect the community and to fight these cases and advance the law so that there's more protections for everybody and less fear, less paranoia. Other questions? Yes.
What do you think about the encouraging us to, discuss this among the Muslims and that's the only solution for the Palestine? Nothing to do with terrorist organizations, we're just talking about legitimate armies and
So we have a very specific, fact-specific question here from someone in the audience. I won't repeat for everyone, but this is the exact kind of question that you should approach MLFA about, because there's more facts you want to know. And also, any communications you have about a specific circumstance are protected in the attorney-client relationship only if you're having that conversation privately with the attorney. So that's the exact kind of thing, right? That's it. The thing went off in your head, and that's when you say, let's just call MLFA for 5 minutes and get their opinion, their general advice about that specific situation. Because it all depends, right? Exactly what was said. Who said it? Where did they say it? What do they mean by it? Who did they talk to about it? All of these things need to be taken into consideration, and they need to be done in the privacy of your discussion with an attorney. Thank you for that. Please reach out to MLFA.
They have a lot of resources. So that's something. Set up, like you said, set up these people and just engage and make.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're happening.
Good question. What does the FBI get out of setting up all these Muslims? Well, the FBI gets further justification for their program. The FBI spends $5 billion a year. They get $5 billion a year from the government just for counterterrorism investigations in the United States. There are no actual terrorists in the United States. So to justify, they have almost in every major city, there is a specific FBI counterterrorism office with its own task force. That costs a lot of money. That means for the whole area of San Antonio, for example, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year investigating counterterrorism. That means at the end of the year that they have to fill out these reports. How many terrorists did you catch? What were your counterterrorism investigations? And so if you're in San Antonio or you're in Sparta, Tennessee, there isn't really a lot of that. And so it becomes internet activity, trying to push people over the edge. And we do see a lot of these entrapment type cases, and we argue entrapment all the time, but it's so hard to prove. But for what do they get out of it? That's what it is. They have $5 billion to testify every year on counterterrorism. And so if there aren't any terrorists, there's always the material support of terrorism statute. You can charge that as a conspiracy or as an attempt. And that means criminalization of speech. And you can get most people to say anything, especially on the internet.
If an officer is taken for 20 days, is that
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay, thank you all so much. I'm going to pass this back off to Jawad to close us out.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Inshallah, I hope this was very beneficial for everybody. I know it was for myself. I'm always happy to be able to learn from our attorneys. I work as our operations manager and work with them every day, but it's always great to learn directly from them and all the cases that happen and the way that they kind of operate. Inshallah, as Sophia mentioned, if you guys have any concerns or issues or questions, you can go to mlfa.org. That's where you can actually ask us questions, reach out to us. And we also have a lot right now, especially about Gaza. We have the Gaza education page where we're answering a lot of questions around things like who to donate to, what can I say online, all these types of things. And if you guys are able to in the area in Mass Dallas over in Richardson, inshallah, tomorrow, 10 a.m., we're having a panel called the Gaza Impact, which is a town hall event in which this today was more of a presentation, but we're going to have Sophia as well as the rest of our lawyers and legal team there to answer questions directly for the community, specifically around the Gaza issue and legal implications and legal insights. So we'd love to have you there, inshallah, if you can, 10 a.m. at the Mass Dallas Islamic Center in Richardson. Inshallah, we have to pray Isha right now. Jazakallah khair. We have a table outside with some of our upcoming events. Come learn more, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.